Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life, not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. Oh yeah, we're also on YouTube, but the URL's really weird, so just go to YouTube and search for Virtual Memories Show, and you'll find it. Now, you can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Now, this week's show comes to you from Seattle, Washington. Amy and I came out here for a pal's wedding over the weekend and a little vacation. Of course, I also got in a couple of podcasts, these with Ellen Forney and Matt Ruff, and those will air in the next couple of weeks. Our guest this week is Howard Chaykin. Howard is a comics artist who's been a pro longer than I've been alive. And by pro, I mean he's been making a living from comics just about that whole time. See, a lot of the comics guests I have on the show make comics around their day jobs, or at least have to get some sort of work to support themselves while they make their comics. And Howard's not like that. And I hadn't really considered that contrast until we sat down to talk, what it's like to treat comics as a profession. Now, that said, Howard is no hack. He's been doing intensely personal comics just through an action sensibility, I guess, all these decades. Now, I was exposed to Howard's work at way too young an age, but it turned out okay. During the indie comics explosion in the early 80s, he created this great science fiction comic called American Flagg, with 2 G's and 2 exclamation points, which kind of predicted our culture's current state, although we don't have a Mars colony to escape to. Flagg was a really fun and sexy comic, but it also had these sort of formal innovations that set it apart from just about everything else going on in comics. And this was like the page layouts, the lettering design, narrative cuts, the treatment of sex was also something that was very different than the way comics usually treated and still do. Plus, the lead character, Reuben Flagg, was Jewish, and as far as I knew, there were no comics featuring a Jewish action hero who gets the girls, and he gets a lot of girls. Howard went on from Flagg to do work for mainstream comics companies, including, I should point out he was doing that sort of stuff before doing American Flagg, which came out from First Comics. Anyway, this is all just inside baseball stuff. My point is, he went on to do adaptations or reboots of a couple of properties like The Shadow and Black Hawk for DC in the mid-'80s. But the work that thrilled me the most was his personal project, Time Squared. These were, so far, 2 48-page comics about this alternate New York City in the 1950s, filled with jazz, robots, kinetic sculptures, bog monsters, and again, sexy girls. It's gorgeous to look at, but I will admit, as I admit to Howard in this episode, the storytelling modes in it were too complex for me at the time. I just perceptually couldn't keep up with everything that was going on in that comic. Now, I think I have. Anyway, I'm not going to recount all of Howard's work here, except to say he's done superhero comics, westerns, spy thrillers, noir, erotica, or porn, depending on how you want to look at it. Look up Black Kiss. That's the one I'm talking about. He also worked in TV for a bunch of years. His newest work is a comic from Image Comics called Divided States of Hysteria. We'll get into that in a minute. Howard's work all these years is characterized by this intense craft and absolutely singular style, as well as the irreverent / transgressive subject matter, and the arched eyebrow and shit-eating grin that he's absolutely perfected in terms of drawing faces. You guys know that I'm not really interested in mainstream culture and comics, but I will always stop and look at Howard's work because it carries a perspective and a worldview, and it just looks great. I pitched Howard on doing the show from a recent L.A. trip. He was up for it, so I drove out to his place in Ventura immediately after picking up my rental car at the airport. We got into conversation pretty easily, and we ended up spending about 4 hours together that afternoon, only 2 or so of which are on tape. He's had an amazing career, and I'm really glad we got to talk. Now, there are a couple of caveats. One, he had his feet up on a table for part of the episode, and that caused this little background squeak that I could not eliminate from the sound. Two, there's been a controversy over the cover of an upcoming issue of Divided States of Hysteria. That happened after we recorded. I did email him to see if he had any remarks he'd like me to include in this intro. I haven't heard back, and I'm not going to get into it. Here's Howard's bio from the Image Comics website. Howard Chaykin is a longtime veteran of the comic book business, serving as an artist and writer for nearly every publisher of comics in the past 4 decades and counting. He took the 90s off to work on mostly unwatchable television, so he missed the money and dreck that was comics in that execrable decade. He is responsible, some might say culpable, for introducing a number of previously unexplored themes to comic books. If you're not hip to what that's supposed to mean, there's always Wikipedia. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Howard Chaykin.
I walk through it once a week. I go to my sauna on Sunday mornings and read the New York Times in there.
Get a schwitz.
I do. I'm that old Jew. I really am. It is the one great pleasure of my life.
In a sense, you're always the old Jew.
I am
of a cartoonist.
Well, yeah.
At least.
Well, I mean, I'm that connecting tissue to the previous generation.
Let's start with
Let's start. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Are we on?
Yeah, we've been.
Okay.
I'll cut it down. Trust me.
Okay.
Blah blah blah. And again, you have no fucks to give at this point, so does.
I don't really care. I want to be loved. I just not really to work that hard at it.
Yeah. So talk about being the bridge. What it was your coming up and being a gopher and working for artists whom you idolized, essentially.
Yeah.
And then what it means to have assistants of your own nowadays.
Well, I met Gil Kane when I was 13. Mm-hmm. I was selling comic books that I had stolen from a friend of mine at a bookstore run by a guy named Dave in Brooklyn, on Ralph Avenue in Brooklyn, St. John's. And I was in awe of this guy. I was a partisan of his work and among my fellow comic book enthusiasts. And
how did you know it was him?
I was introduced to him, but Dave introduced. He said, "Yeah, you like comic books? This is Gil Kane."
Okay.
And
because at that point in my life would not have been able to identify Gil Kane.
Nor I.
So okay, good. I'm glad there was an actual mechanism.
He was wearing. My recollection, and I'm that guy, was gray flannels, blue blazer, white Oxford broadcloth, blue necktie, lace-ups, but he went to loafers later on, and his hair at that point was already white with black eyebrows. He was very tall. And because he had no palate and ate like a child, he remained very skinny till his death. Mm. His lack of sophistication when it came to food was shocking in so sophisticated a man. I went to work for him when I was 19, after I'd heard through the grapevine of all the other comic book, wannabes, that his assistant had died in his sleep at the age of 21 or 22. Mm-hmm. The guy was going to be a big deal, but just undiagnosed heart disease. And I was house sitting. I went around the corner to where he was living. I was house sitting 3 blocks from where he lived, and I hired on. And I have to emphasize, I had no skill set. I had no talent whatsoever. And he identified this and confirmed this for me. And I worked for him as a gopher. And the experience I had working for him for about 8-9 months informs my entire professional adult life, in the sense that I learned how to behave like a cartoonist from watching him work. the trope about you can learn more about playing tennis by watching a game being played than by reading a book about tennis. It remains true. And I stand on the shoulders of giants. Gil was my first boss. I worked for Gray Morrow, Wallace Wood, and Neil Adams. And Joe Orlando was my rabbi when I first started getting work at DC Comics, who taught me how to put my innate barbarism and bury it and conceal it in order to navigate the corporate world that was DC Comics back in the early 70s. I owe all of those 5 guys my career. I emphasize, and I know this is not kind of false modesty or self-deprecation. It is an honest appraisal. I had no talent. I had no particular skills. I am everything I am. I have learned to do by rote and by discipline. And
how long did it take you, though, to
learn? A long
learn,
time.
I just mean to learn the lessons from those guys. When you talk about how formative they were, did you recognize it at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
I just wasn't sure if it was
a
rebellious kid thing. That
No. That was beaten out of me early on. Quite seriously. I mean, first of all, I had an epiphany during an anti-war rally in the late 60s when I watched colleagues of mine burning an American flag. And that was when the movement lost me as an active participant in demonstrations, because it felt to me a puerile and fatuous gesture, handing over an incredibly valuable symbol to people who would end up using it against us in much more effective ways than we'd used it ourselves. And I've never been one of those people who has an innate, immediate rebellion to authority sensibility. I'm too much of a coward and too cautious in a lot of ways and too reckless in others to immediately rebel against authority. I took the words that came out of these guys very seriously. I've said more than once in public and in private that I wanted to grow up to be Gil Kane, but I was afraid I was going to end up like Wallace Wood, right, who was a deeply self-loathing, self-hating, self-destructive human being. Very talented and just utterly, ruthlessly self-destroying. Gil was more like me. Gil was also a cerebral talent. Gil's early work demonstrates nothing but hunger. And the unfortunate fact is that whereas a lot of Gil's work was never signed or, signed under the various pseudonyms that he worked under, my first decade of work is there for the world to see, and it poisons my career, and it toxically affects the way I'm perceived.
And to me, your work begins really with American Flagg.
Right.
And I never, you'd mentioned having a 10-issue run of Star Wars back when the adaptation was first being done. But, it's one of those things I try to tell people about Dave Sim, the whole Cerebus thing, and why I can never get into it, because you have to suffer through all of those early issues and growth pains before you get to anything that's worth. Like, those are actually integral to the story ultimately, and they're painful to read.
I've never read them.
Yeah,
I've never read. I mean, I know.
Don't start.
Great.
For that reason.
I feel better already.
You have my absolution. Ding!
Thank you.
But yeah, that sense of you have to work. You have to have that journeyman path.
I sucked. I mean, it's just, and it's all in my. It's like in high school when they told you when you misbehaved that it was going to be on your permanent record, and then when you found out your permanent record didn't really exist, it was it was kind of like God being waved at you, and like a God fear, but for me it is my permanent record, and the problem for me is exacerbated by the fact that the enthusiasts have been convinced and collude in the convincement that the material is the brand, and my contention is the talent is the brand, and ultimately, that's a sensibility that exists in the more independent museum art based comics kind of stuff. But I work in the mainstream, and in the mainstream, the audience tends to respond to commercial product. I mean, what you're dealing with is to a great extent 50-year-old men still reading the same material they read when they were 15. Yeah. With a slather of gravitas on it to make them more comfortable with reading the equivalent of YA fiction. And so that first 10 years of my career is just an embarrassment to me. And of course I can't disavow it because it's on my permanent record. Yeah. There it is.
Where do you feel you made the jump in that case?
Well, I got booted out of Marvel Comics in the late 70s, early 80s, and I went and did paperback illustration for a couple of years until Reagan's administration cut into the publishing business so dramatically there was no money, and that concurrently happened with an offer from the people who ultimately became First Comics that would enable me to get out from under the debt that I had accrued working for Byron Price. Byron was an incredibly seductive figure who was able to dangle things in front of me that I really wanted to do, but I never made any money doing it. And unfortunately, I know comic book fans don't like to hear about the money aspect of it, but the fact is it is a calling, but it's also a career. And I've never been a huge money maker because I'm not a fan favorite. I'm a cult figure, and I recognize that. But working for Byron generated an enormous amount of debt for me. Mm-hmm. I was kiting checks. I was, living off credit cards. And the Flagg offer made it possible for me to get a clean slate to pay off all that debt. And I know that people don't like to hear about that as a motivating reality, but unfortunately, it is a motivating reality.
That's all part of the...
I was 32 years old. I was up to my ass in debt, and there was an opportunity to get out from under. To this day, I don't really have any idea why the people at first, Mike Gold, Rick Obadiah, and others, felt that I was capable of creating anything of any value that would justify the kind of money they were spending. Hmm. I'm grateful they did. Flagg was what was created. And
around what year was that?
Career.
Like 82, 83?
82. Mm-hmm. The first issue came out in the summer of 83. So I was working on it from before that. And I simply wanted to do a book that would reflect how I felt at that point. A 32-year-old alcoholic drug addict.
What was your drug of choice?
Marijuana, psychedelics. I didn't do any cocaine. I didn't do heroin. I was afraid of needles. But I really loved psychedelics, and I loved marijuana. And my alcoholic diet was Courvoisier, vodka, and scotch. I drank frequently like a pimp. And
it was the 70s, and 80s.
And the 80s. It certainly was. And I was looking good. I did okay. And Flagg was a reflection of a point of view. I mean, I'm a reasonably smart guy. And that doesn't mean anything in the context of comics because comics is predominantly aspirational.
What do you mean?
The guys who are very popular in comics tend to write and draw the way the audience would write and draw if it only could.
Oh, a friend of mine once felt that some of the original Image Comics guys were successful because fans could almost draw as good as that.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, where you could never draw
Chaykin
or Kirby or.
But I also don't think I think comics fans are desperate. With all due respect, tend to prefer being pandered to and patronized than challenged.
Yeah.
And I like challenges and I like being challenged and challenging. Flagg was my first educational experience in finding out that my audience didn't share my sensibilities quite so effectively as I'd feared. I got death threats from people, and it was
largely because of the political content.
Yeah, and also the sexual content. Comic book fans tend to prefer pinups to erotica. They like salacious implication as opposed to explication. For example, you're talking to a guy who's done a lot of erotic material, some hardcore stuff, who's never been to a strip club.
Huh.
I would never go to a strip club because I recognize without having to experience it that the dynamic of a strip club has to be being a member of the audience, being entertained by people who have utter complete contempt for those audience members and expect to be tipped, ignoring that contempt. And that just seems counterintuitive to me.
It sounds right. I mean, that sounds like a good characterization of it.
I get enough contempt in my daily life. I don't have to pay for it.
I don't need to pay for this abuse. I get abused.
No, exactly. I'm married. I've been married a lot. That was a cliche joke, but so the Flagg stuff and the stuff that followed it is the defining elements of my career. I set a tone, and with Flagg, I think I became a brand. I demonstrated.
I would certainly say that. Yeah. I think that your work since then, the Chaykin aspect,
Yes,
is imprinted there. But
and furthermore, since that time, I stopped delivering pencils when I draw material. I do full scripts, but I don't do. My feeling is, if you're hiring me, you know what you're going to get, or at least within certain parameters. The Flagg stuff sort of sets me up and puts me in a position of having to maintain a certain level of quality and commitment for me, until I realized that for the majority of the comic book enthusiasts in the United States, I'm the guy who did Star Wars in 1976 and 77. That many of them have no clue of work that I've done since then. They don't know the existence of Flagg or Black Hawk or The Shadow or Black Kiss or any other things I've done.
Which is just nuts, given that it's a 40-year body of work with one big pause in the middle of it.
As I've said more than once, I've constantly estimated my audience, and I've lived to regret it.
Now, can you talk a little, though, about what it was that you did with Flagg when you started? Because we'll use the term groundbreaking, just because it was 1982, 83, and nobody's comic looked like that. And part of that was the collaboration with your letterer and with the colorist who were involved. But the comic itself was so, I want to say, dense, like informationally dense, and working in a different rhythm than essentially an action comic, which is still what it is, with satire and everything else. Nobody was doing anything like that. And was that conscious on your part as you were developing it, the sort of media centricity of it, the density of it? And were there, precursors of that in your work prior, or did you really see this as, wow, this is what I really want to do, and I don't really see somebody else doing X?
Well, before we went on mic, I mentioned how much I watch television, and I love television. I really do. Television is the defining social and cultural idea of my life and experience. And back then, I believed that television was a medium that congratulated you for being too hip for television. And once you believed that, they had you hooked. And I love the idea of media saturation. I just love it. And I loved clothes, porn, because that was the first wave of VCRs. I had a Beta it looked like a Wollensack reel-to-reel with a wire remote. I loved porn back then, because in those days, porn was the work of failed actresses and actors, as opposed to failed rock and roll stars' girlfriends. And I loathe amateur porn. I think it completely misses the point. The kabuki nature of pornography back in the 70s and 80s was a hugely appealing thing to me. I really thought it was fabulous. And I was reading a lot of social satire, and I just, I was skipped and sinking it. The core character relationships derives from Terry and the Pirates and Maverick. It's my first full-on James Garner crush material, because Flagg really is Garner following the idea of Neil Simon's, think Yiddish, go British. And I really mean that very seriously. All comic books in the generation before mine were WASP characters, which were beards for Jewish sensibilities.
Oh, I've got tough Jew written as a note here. I was wondering,
I'm actually a pussy Jew, but that's
but you write tough Jews.
I do. So. I always, somebody's got to fake it out. Yeah. As Jules Pfeiffer said, he said Superman didn't come from planet Krypton. He came from planet Poland. And I think that was fantastic. So Flagg was an articulation of that. It was done before AIDS had evolved into the cultural event that it would become and remain. And the social behavior of New York in the late 70s and early 80s was as wide open and crazy as you can possibly imagine. And my then wife and I were serious clubbers, nightclub people, drinking people, partying people. We looked great and we dressed well. We were both very interested in clothes. And Flagg reflected that interest. The love of lingerie, the wordplay, the influence of people as disparate as Fritz Leiber and Patrick Dennis, Max Schulman, comic writers of the 50s and 60s who were completely forgotten today, who were huge parts of my childhood.
What was your exposure to them like?
Oh, I ate them up I loved that. I read everything Patrick Dennis ever wrote, and nobody remembers Patrick Dennis anymore. What's left of Patrick Dennis's career is Anti-Mame. That's it.
Right.
But there's also, Little Me, Genius, Guestward Ho, and Max Schulman is, Dobie Gillis. But Does Anyone Need a Light? The Mattress Testers, just some Rally Around the Flag Boys. I guarantee that reading it now would make my head explode in the same way that reading Edgar Rice Burroughs now would make my head explode. But it was so formative. And Jack Douglas, Never Trust a Naked Bus Driver. My brother was an only child. Years and years ago, I was maybe 12 or 13, and I was just becoming aware of the existence of comics fan culture. And I read a quote for either, I don't remember if it was Bill Spicer or Richard Kyle, because back then the only really smart comics fanzines were being done up in Boston and in California. There was nothing happening in the Midwest or New York. And one of those guys, I forget who, I'm sorry, made a crack to the effect that the only adult comics would be in the realm of humor, which of course I resented immediately because at 13, I identified comedy with pointlessness and meaninglessness. And as an adult, what Flagg reflected was my belief that comics really should be thrills, chills, and laughs. And that what set Flagg apart from its other books was that it had a sense of irony, and there was actually comic. There was some funny shit going on, as opposed to the kind of slapsticky, patronizing, occasional comedy that occurred in comics for the most part. Among my favorite comic books were always those post-war action comics and Superman covers, where Superman was being domesticated by Lois Lane and being denutted by Lois. Getting his hair cut, breaking scissors. Oh, that's comic gold. I love that shit. I really do. Yeah. I think that was some fun work. So,
and that was really the moment for you, though.
Yeah.
You really just had the sense of this is what comics could be in terms of. Again, I don't think of it in any sort of formalist, artistic statement. But
I never.
Just that
because
this is what you wanted to read.
No, because I recognize that most of these people. I get into trouble.
These people. Yeah.
Well, and by these people, I mean comics enthusiasts. Yeah. I was one of those people. I've got a photograph up there of me. Looking right there. Look at that photograph. An ass like a Buick. And I was one. I wholeheartedly embraced every aspect of comic book fandom. But when I became a professional, and a lot of it was Gil. Gil pushing me. The difference is
it always weirds me out every time you say his name, just because of the name.
Sorry,
I understand. I'll let it go.
I'll call him Eli for now.
Yeah, Eli Katz.
Yeah, the difference is that Gil, by the time he was in his 40s, had stopped reading fiction and was reading nothing but criticism. And I still read popular fiction. I'm 66 years old, and I still read popular fiction. I don't read comic books. I don't read science fiction. I find it adolescent. But I read a lot of popular fiction. Crime fiction, historical stuff, no SF, and I'm still open to that. But the basic model, the hero with the wound model of mainstream comics, is going to remain the archetype because it's easy, and it puts no onus on the reader.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, it doesn't challenge them.
Right. If you think about it for a moment, Batman is about a guy who had a bad day when he was 8. And his reaction to it is that of the 15-year-old boys. But that's what comics are. They were created by 15-year-old boys for marginally less skill set-based other 15-year-old boys.
Well, I tried explaining to someone a few years ago, early in my midlife crisis, rereading The Watchmen in my late 30s. When I was a teen, the Ayn Randian badass character is the one you focus on. In your 30s, it's that guy who can't get it up unless he's wearing a costume and really thinks his career has gone down the drain. That's a lot more poignant than a dude who, breaks people's fingers in a bar.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's the Norman Lear thing. Norman Lear is now in his 90s. I just watched this documentary about 9 people in their 90s continuing to survive and thrive. And there was an American Masters thing about Lear a couple of months ago.
I will add, by the way, Al Jaffe put me off for 3 months.
Because he was too busy?
Yes.
Yeah.
I said, can we get together? He's like, well, September. I'm like, Sure. You're 96 years old, and if you think September's a good time for us to record, we'll do it.
I saw Alan Baltimore this past year. I can dig it.
Yeah.
So Lear has never, ever acknowledged, in my opinion, that the gross success of All in the Family was not people who shared his beliefs, which was that Archie Goodwin was an object of ridicule.
Archie Bunker.
What did I say? Archie
Goodwin.
Wow. Sorry, Dad. That Archie Bunker was a character that the audience agreed with. And I think that's a much more salient, interesting aspect of the All in the Family world than the meathead is right belief system.
Did reality turn out stranger than Flagg?
Well, look,
I know you weren't doing predictive fiction or anything. You were just satirizing that early Reagan era.
Yeah, I paid attention, I guess, and I just wasn't that interested in patronizing an audience of men in their 20s and 30s with teenage themes, which seemed to be what comic books were about at that point. The great genius of the X-Men, and by which I do not mean Stan Lee's X-Men, but Chris Claremont's X-Men, Chris and John's, was to identify the narcissism of the comic book reader as teenager and congratulate that narcissism to identify superheroes with acne and social issues and social problems. It's a brilliant idea. The problem is that in the same way that you mentioned Watchmen, when I read Watchmen in black and white before you did, because it was sent to me, each issue was sent to me as it arrived. And the fact that Watchmen did not completely eliminate the superhero comic book from the landscape is a demonstration of the fact of a vast point being vastly missed. That instead of wrecking the field, it simply provided an entirely different direction in lingua franca for a new talent pool to build an entire empire on top of. And I can still read Watchmen. I pretty much read everything Alan is. I like Alan's work a lot, except for Promethea, which I find unbearable.
I have a story about that. I'll tell you off tape, but yeah.
I like Jim stuff, but I find everything Promethea is about is the antithesis of what I care about in terms of narrative.
It's a feminization of Thor. And I mean it in a gender balancing thing. It's Thor, but where instead of a big dick hammer, it's a creative
a vast more.
Yeah, that's part. It's creative impulse turns her into the. I was reading. I explained it to Paul DeFilippo and his partner, his science fiction writer, who was puzzled by Promethea. I'm like, if you think about a feminist Thor, where Thor doesn't slap a big dick on the ground to turn into the God of Thunder, but has to engage in creative act and go into this universe exploration.
I like it.
Then it works. It doesn't mean it's a satisfying comic by any means, but at least it's a way of understanding what Moore may have been up to. So, yeah, you're getting old, Chaykin.
Don't judge me. I'm simply shifting from into the astral plane. I think. Now turn them over, reverse them.
Otherwise, you cut off circulation to the legs.
Hey, got to keep moving.
Yeah. What you're talking about, still being able to appreciate Moore's work.
Yeah, and there isn't much around that. There's stuff that I read the first 30 some odd issues of 100 Bullets, and I thought they were fabulous.
I never tried that.
What's that?
I never tried that one.
The first couple of issues I sort of sniffed at and poo-pooed until I really took a look at it and realized that particularly those first 30 issues look like the work of one man. There's a synergy that exists between Eduardo and Brian that is staggering. And if you needed any further indication of the relevance of an editor to material, that once Axel leaves the book and goes to Marvel and the book is no longer edited by Axel, it wanders for 70 issues. It ceases to have the focus and narrative availability of those first 30. And 30 fucking issues, 100 books. It's a lot of work.
Well, that was a moment with, we've talked about the Hernandez brothers off mic, but they were on a panel celebrating 30 years of Love and Rockets, and one of them said, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and all those guys never got to spend 30 years with a single title. We did, we own it and we can keep doing it, but there was that sense of, longevity. You get good instead of just being, like you'd said, treated as though the the title is the brand instead of the creator.
Well, I don't have the patience to do any one thing for that long. I mean, Well,
I noticed that also. Your work's characterized nowadays by shorter miniseries.
Well, I like doing. I have an idea and I'll do it. I mean, I did 15 issues of Satellite Sam with Matt. Matt has often described it as Howard Chaykin fan fiction, which I find kind of amusing.
I read the first collection, and I would characterize it like that too. Yeah.
But I don't have a single idea that I have any interest in doing permanently. And it makes me less appealing to the audience, but it also makes me feel more comfortable with not being a one-trick pony. I have other things I'd like to do.
And was that a conscious decision on your part, or something you just sort of noticed?
It's biological, as they say.
Oh, but I mean, is it something you noticed over time that
sure.
Wow, I cannot stick to better?
Well, I mean, I've got the second arc of Divided States of Hysteria in structure in a generalized structure right now. But before I do it, I want to do the third and final Times Squared volume. I'm going to do that at the end of the year, and it's shaping up.
To return to the question of density in your comics.
Yes. Speaking of density.
When I read Times Squared, when they first came out, I was probably college age, early 90s, late 80s.
Too young.
Yeah. I reread them yesterday in preparation for this.
Boy, are they coherent now,
completely.
Aren't they? Yeah.
I'm totally able to follow the entire shebang. It all makes sense. The fabric of it is there. Everything is totally clear to me. And again, I wonder... did you know you were screwing with audiences, or did you realize you were doing something ahead of its time?
No, total hubris. I assumed that people were ready for this.
Yeah.
I know it's there. There you go. No, total hubris. And that experience is something that I've had a lot. I mean, people have read the book, resented me for it, and then 20 years later said, "Wow, no, okay." Yeah. I mean, and the fact is, I'm going to have to put myself into the mindset of a 34-year-old man to do that again this year. I have no idea what it's going to look like, except that I will force myself to approach it from that same level of abstraction, and that's going to be hard because it's hard enough to do the work. I'm not naturally gifted. I'm a grind, and I need to grind. I can do stuff there. I mean, my skill set is page layout. That's the primary. Everything else kind of revolves around that. Yeah,
actually, when did that develop for you? Because that is a big chunk of what I was talking about with the density.
That's Flagg. That was literally working in Flagg, figuring out how to do pages of narrative with narrative value that were of a piece, and panels within the page that were of a piece in terms of narrative value, and to find shapes and insignia that had narrative value. Just because I looked at a lot of poster art, very little narrative stuff. I looked at Richard Saul Werman's stuff a lot. Werman did a series of books called the Access books. He attempted to reinvent the tour guide in the 70s and 80s. He did these for various cities, for a number of cities internationally. He also did them for sports, and they had exploding images. And he did a lot of the redesigned subway maps for the London Underground, from New York, and from the Metro as well. And he's a cartographer and designer. And there were things there that could be used.
Did you have any experience in design?
None.
Or graphic design?
No, I'm.
I assume everything's self-taught.
Yeah, I went to school to be a radio broadcaster. That was the. I mean,
the famous Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
I went to Columbia College in Chicago.
You're a very big disappointment to me.
Thank you. Join the club.
Yeah, take a number.
There's a long line ahead of you. But I came back to New York from Chicago after 6 months and hired on with Gil Kane, and that's all she wrote. Mm-hmm.
But essentially worked your way through graphic design to figure out how to make a page that worked. By
figuring it out. But look, I mean, my cohort, my generation, we all came in the late 60s to the early 70s. I was the youngest member of the group, the least talented of the group. I had to come up with something to compete. You can't know, I've said this more than once, what it was like to walk into a room and have Bernie Wrightson waiting for you.
Yeah.
Luckily, Wrightson was a lunkhead, so that his work was brilliant, but he wasn't. Luckily, it's a horrible thing to say.
Just that it was so. It was easy to him, and he didn't have to work it.
Well, no, he worked. No.
Oh, okay.
But Wrightson had a great work ethic.
Oh, right.
But his work was so utterly superior to anything else anyone was doing that one had to assume at best fourth position. Yeah. At best. And I was an eighth. I just was terrible. And there were a lot of guys who were just better than I was. But if you look at it now, the only guys in my generation who were producing work that's not a parody of itself are Simonson and me.
Well, I'm hoping to record with. He's going to be at the that Columbus festival I mentioned off mic before. I think he's supposed to be there this October. And
his brother's still out there, I believe.
Got me. The organizer told me he's hoping to have Walt Simonson there.
If you need me to put in a word for him to convince him to do it, say so.
But it's funny because, again, as we were talking about before we started, I was pitched younger mainstream comics people, and I have no interest whatsoever in talking to them. Whereas you, particularly having carved out the career you have, but Simonson also, knowing that I read those Thor comics when I was 12 or 13 that blew my mind, but seeing the body of work he's produced, I thought, that guy's probably had an interesting enough life and, an understanding of comics that, I'm willing to overcome my mainstream,
Well, if you catch him in the right moment at the right time, he is a font of anecdote. He's much kinder than I am.
Well,
I'm serious. I mean,
it would be tough to be as mean-spirited as you.
I am sort of mean. I mean, look, I acknowledge this. I'm not.
Yeah, I wasn't being sarcastic. It would be tough to be as mean-spirited as you.
I'm venal, petty, and small-minded.
Mm-hmm. But you're honest about your venality.
I have no illusions. It's because I have. I mean, some have Tourette's. I have Tourette's, and I feel it's very competitive of me, but I'm stuck with it. I can't get around it. Yeah. So.
Your lead character from Times Square is described as a reformed shitheel. Is that really or describes himself as such? Does that really kind of characterize your protagonist of choice?
God, having shit thrown back at me like this.
Oh, I think it's one of the best lines ever, for Christ's sake. That's
Well, I guess. I mean, I wasn't reformed at that point. I think that was my aspirational game.
Yeah, someday I'll be a reformed shitheel.
I mean, I cleaned up my act in January of 1992, and it was a transformative experience. I mean, there have been a number of transformations in my life. That was one of them. And my life is at a much different trajectory than I might have anticipated after that.
Do you feel your work suffered because of the addiction issues you had?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I felt that I had to learn how to work again. But, I'm boringly sober. And I'm a member of a recovery program, which I hold in great esteem and great gratitude, but also have constant doubt about, because I have an aversion to any organization of any kind that abhors critical thinking.
I understand that.
This morning I was at a meeting, and they were passing around a medallion, which someone had taken for 3 years of sobriety, and it was handed to me, and I should have stopped myself, but my facial expression demonstrated my contempt for the attempt to make totems.
Okay.
And a cult,
a ceremony aspect
and cult such things. I just get the fuck away from me. It's not a cult. I mean, I take very seriously the idea that my sobriety is based on folk wisdom and common sense.
And that you have to, I don't say willfully blind, but for the sake of the group dynamic of it, you have to. Well,
I did mention that I'm grateful right now for the fact that the program has taught me restraint of tongue and pen, because I'm in a bit of a controversial mud hole right now, and I'm not responding to it, and because
don't feed the trolls.
That's right. No engagement, and because, as I said, I'm kind of unkind and mean, and my only option is either Carthaginian or nuclear, So go figure.
And your work since then? The thing I've found about 5 years without drinking is that while it's great that I don't have to worry about a hangover, I get an extra hour or two a day that other people don't get. It's really just the fact that everybody else has grown more boring with every fucking minute that passes by. But beyond that, it's been tremendous for me. So
look, I mean, I was at the Orlando MegaCon a couple of weeks back, and I had a cold, and it was delightful. I ate alone.
Yeah.
With a book. I didn't have to socialize. I had an excuse not to be there. I sat there in a restaurant with my Kindle propped up on a salt shaker. Ate alone. Got to bed at 9 o'clock. Slept till 8. It was fantastic.
See, I have this with trade shows. And again, in my case, not drinking is just medical advice, but having to no, water's fine for me, thanks. It's just one of those like I'd sooner just not go hang out with room full of people who are going to.
I'm a buzzkill, and I'm surrounded by bores.
Yeah. And so you spend your time at a drawing table. What's your workday like?
I get up at 5. I do a little bit of work. I go to the gym. I have breakfast with pals. Where once again I'm the youngest man at the table, which is a treat. Let me tell you. I'm back here by 8:30 or 9, and I work. I have 2 assistants who show up. The room smells like a gigantic fart with feet at a certain point because it's guys sitting and farting and yelling. I take a brief break at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I work till 5. I generally speaking don't so much work. Let me amend that. I work toward a goal. I rarely work toward time. I have this much must be done today. If it's done by 3 o'clock, my day's over. If it's done by 7, that's what I'm working till. And I work 5 days a week. I'll occasionally put a little bit of work on the weekends. Sunday is generally speaking reserved for a long sauna, the New York Times, a movie. I mean, I may get to a movie today, may not. I'm okay with that.
I apologize for keeping you.
Don't be a schmuck. I'm willing to mistake attention for affection, as you might have heard. And I'm willing to work with that. So it's a very structured day. I like organization. I create an atmosphere structure. And I'm good with that. I mean, it's how I run my life.
Do your assistants have to train in shit-eating grin drawing or arched eyebrow or anything? Or
They do nothing to do with figure work.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you...
no. I have an IT guy who sits there, and I have a background man who sits over there. And they're both, I made both of them promises. They'll do better work for me than they do for themselves. And they do. That is my commitment to everyone who's ever worked for me. What
did you learn about managing assistants?
I learned as much as anything else from literally spending an hour and a half, 2 hours with Noel Sickles and Milton Caniff in the early 80s. I bought them drinks at the San Diego convention when they were guests of honor, because they both had long-standing experience of working with assistants, both being and having. There was a rumor floating for years that Alfred Andriola worked for those guys, and that they had ghosted his Charlie Chan samples. Andriola's guy was best known for doing Carrie Drake. I met Andriola years ago. He seemed like a very nice man. And I learned a lot about just conversationally. And, I've been one. I think it's a factor of the comic book business that is unfortunately lost. I think working as an apprentice trained me to do everything I do.
And that was my next question. Does that ecosystem exist much?
No, not really. The last assistant, when I left New York City, Dean Haspiel was my assistant. And Dean has gone off to have a very interesting independent career. But I've known Dean since he was 16. He's now 50. And he was an incredibly funny guy. He was one of the first readers of Divided States of Hysteria, which was a very gratifying experience. I sent him PDFs. He's read the first 3 issues, so he knows where it's going. But I don't believe there are a lot of other guys who work with assistants. And I always have. I have since 1985. And I worked in the 70s. I had guys doing some work in color work. Joe Jusko, Bat Lash was my assistant, people like that. And I've always had people out here. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is that I like having company. Although I'm perfectly comfortable being alone, I like the idea of having someone behind me and someone ahead of me sort of pushing and being pushed back and forth. Nobody works weekends. It's a come in the morning. Calvin shows up at 10. Ramon shows up at 1. And, Ramon was going to take work home, but then I said, don't, please let it go. So we're fine.
Is writing something you do solo?
Oh, never anybody. I worked.
That's what I wonder.
I worked with a writing partner for a couple of times, and we'll never do it again.
Why is that?
Because I feel that it dilutes the process.
Because I have this great idea. I want you. I'm just kidding. So.
It dilutes the process, and it doesn't enhance my brand, if you will. And I don't think I'm going to be drawing anybody else's writing. I'm 66. I always give myself 3 more years each time I get up in the morning. And I don't believe I'm going to be working with another writer for the rest of my life. I've done it, and I'm not interested in doing it anymore. I'll write other people. I'm writing the Rough and Ready book for Hanna-Barbera, for DC's Hanna-Barbera line, with an incredibly talented new guy named Matt Reynolds, who's just going to take the world by storm. His work is astonishing. I'll flash some of it by you when we're done here.
Cool.
And I'll show you my cover for the first issue. But no, I don't see myself drawing anybody else's scripts. And my scripts for myself and my scripts for other people are identical. Since I don't deliver pencil, my scripts are very, very complete. Before you got here this morning, as a matter of fact, I delivered the first 10 pages of the Newsboy Legion Boy Commandos team up that I'm doing for DC yesterday, and I spent this morning doing the script tweaks to realign the first 10 pages of the script with the artwork I've delivered. Because there's always adjustments. Because you get lazy at a certain point. You get another idea comes in. So.
Are you surprised at all by other artists' interpretation of your scripts?
No.
Okay. I have no idea. Are they really?
I never bring any expectation to the table.
Oh, I just didn't know if they're super detailed or if.
My scripts are extremely detailed.
Okay.
But they're detailed in a very specific way. Because I earnestly and honestly believe that the key to comic books is that in comic book, space represents time. And I'm very, very conscientious about allotting a very specific amount of space to a panel. I don't do 5 panel 1, panel 2. I panel 1 across the page in width, 1/3, 1/2, 1/4 of the page.
So you're very, very specific in
about
terms
the size
of design
and shape.
and layout.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I believe that action is defined by context and by space. And that the amount of time involved in an action is directly related to the amount of space allotted to the action on the page. Most people don't believe this because most people see comic books as an extension of their hobby and their trading cards. Most writers have no understanding of the scale of the real estate of the page. I've mentioned this more than once that I ran into an artist colleague of mine in London a year ago who showed me a 12-panel page that he'd drawn. And this is a guy who's totally inappropriate for 12-panel pages. I'm not going to name his name. He's not graphic. He's very illustrative. And he needs air and space.
Yeah.
And this is just a demonstration of utter ignorance and visual illiteracy on the part of comic book writers, most of whom I think look at comics as a way station to writing television. And that's fine. But
which you sort of did. I mean, not sort of. You did.
I did. But I worked on shit, and I wasn't very good. And I'm not
as opposed to everybody else in Hollywood who was working on much more higher prestige products.
I happen to think that the writing on television of late is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. But you were working in an era before that,
right? But television as a model the model. The world of television that I worked in no longer exists. But the problem with that is that the enthusiasts don't really know how much of the writing of comics is done by the artist. That
I think that's what I was wondering.
Well,
interpretation of your scripts, but again, if you're
I grant it doesn't matter. I still feel that when a fan or when one of the members of the management representation class reacts to a comic book as well written, what they're reacting to is the execution of a template script by an artist. Comic book artists are not illustrators. They are graphic designers in the service of narrative. And their job is to give narrative value to pictures. And in many cases, comic book writers are very non-visual. They like the characters a lot. They like that superhero stuff a lot. But they don't really have an idea of what is visual. I mean, I was at a convention some months back, and a guy who was been writing comics professionally for some time handed me a book that he'd drawn. He was not an artist. And it was a perfect reflection of a complete misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the page as a unit of narrative. This guy had no idea what he was doing. It wasn't even an attempt at having an idea.
But not like a P-car stick figures, just as in terms of a thumbnail.
But I mean, Harvey.
That's a different thing. I know.
Harvey's contempt for mainstream comics was ridiculous because he was basically writing the equivalent of 1950s mainstream comics about himself. They were love comics, only the love object was himself. And and again, the work, unless Robert Crumb was drawing it, it didn't interest me in the least.
Yeah, I tended to fall into that boat too. So. But,
although Harvey really did inform me enormously. When you came in the house, I was listening to Ward L. Gray. And whenever I listen to Ward L. Gray, I always think of Harvey because Harvey sort of schooled me on a lot of Ward L. Gray's work. Great saxophone player who was found dead about 50 miles outside of Vegas. An unsolved murder.
Future plot?
No. The plot of Times Squared 3 is going to be my fictional version of Robert Moses and my fictional version of Jane Jacobs. Only in this version, she loses.
I assume you've read The Power Broker.
Yes.
Okay. That's
Moses is one of those German Jews who confirmed me that they had it coming. What?
My mother will never forgive me for leaving that line in.
Or laughing.
That's fine. Of course, you have to laugh. But there is the moment in the Power Broker where Caro conveys Moses envisioning the West Side Highway and the whole shebang, which, notwithstanding his politics, it's one of those like, yeah, okay, it's it was horrible, but the idea that he had this vision that, he could actually encompass all of what New York what he wanted to turn New York into was pretty amazing. Well,
I just finished reading Ethan Morden's book about Stephen Sondheim, and I like Morden a lot. Morden was a comic book professional, which many people don't know. He was Dorothy Woolfolk's assistant editor on the romance comics at DC in the early 70s. I have to write him a fan letter whenever he remembers me at all. And he talks about West Side Story. There's a whole Sondheim on film, and whenever I see that movie, I'm afflicted with pangs of guilt because the film was shot on the streets of New York where now stands Lincoln Center. The people were booted out of there by Manifest Destiny, by Robert Moses and Manifest Destiny. And then the reason the streets are so empty is because they were completely devoid of people. And the Jets and the Sharks could dance on these streets. Yeah. And I've been to Lincoln Center quite a bit, but I recognize the fact that the razing of that, the destruction of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and the dismantling of Penn Station are two of the greatest crimes committed in New York City that did not involve human life.
You get back to New York relatively often, right?
Not as often as I used to.
How's it changed for you?
Well, I don't get...
Well, you've been in California about 32 years now.
I moved here the day before I turned 35, October the 6th, 1985.
Okay.
And with the assumption I'd be here for a year or two. But I came out here with very specific... And the weather was beginning to kick my ass. I couldn't take it anymore. And more importantly, I had no prospects. I had absolutely no idea what might happen if I got this old. And the only job I could see myself taking that involved healthcare was as an editor. And to this day, I have no idea what editors earn. And as you said, I'm mean-spirited.
There's a Comics Journal interview where Kurt Busiek, is that how it's the guy?
Busiek.
Busiek. Okay.
I think Kurt.
No, I've never read his stuff, but he.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
It's very sweet and charming.
Yeah, I'm sure. The line from this interview, though, apparently he'd had some horrendous infection that was potentially like brain inflicted, some nasal thing or something bizarre like this. And I don't know if he meant it deliberately, but his concern was if this really progressed and became, terrible, he wouldn't be able to write comics anymore, although he could still work as an editor. And it's completely deadpan in the context of the interview.
And I thought you were going that he'd have to move to the woods.
No, not close. But yeah, no, I might be brain damaged, but at least I could be an editor in that case.
So I realized at that point that my mean-spiritedness and my venality would prohibit people wanting to work with me.
Yeah.
I make people cry. I know it.
Well, it was a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar thing. Why won't anybody hire me as an NBA coach? Yeah, maybe because you treated everybody like shit when you were a player, and nobody wants to do you a favor now.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Was he a horrible person?
He was dismissive of press, etc. All the sorts of people who would eventually not give him a good word. When
I know nothing about sports.
Yeah.
So this is. I mean,
that's just because I figured you had some basketball angle on American Flagg way back, but that
was patronizing the audience. I had no idea.
I should have known because they were all Brazilian players.
I had no clue.
Sense.
I had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, my brothers are both jocks and degenerate gamblers, and I'm not that guy at
But
all.
you get that in general, though. I mean, I once had it in a professional context where a guy treated me like shit, and he ended up asking me to run a column in my magazine a year later. And I said yes, but I told him that you do need to remember, when we were at that trade show, and you walked up and treated me like I was a piece of shit, fortune's wheel, it goes up and down. So.
I'm on the board of the Hero Initiative.
Yeah.
And I'm a grasshopper. I'm an ant, rather, in a grasshopper business. Mm-hmm. And you can't know how difficult it is for me to deal with, in an abstract way, because I don't deal with them face to face, but requests for help from people who treated me with contempt and condescension and disdain in my 20s and 30s. It's very difficult.
And later? Even later?
No.
Okay, pretty much in those years. Okay.
No, I mean, fuck it. By the time I hit my 30s after post Flagg,
you were where you were.
Fuck these guys.
Yes.
I mean, you have to understand that what happened to my career in the 80s was that Flagg's readership did not reach the mass market of enthusiasts, but everybody who became a professional in comics and after that point on
had absorbed that.
That was their playbook. That was the school book, and which means that of course you get guys like Todd McFarlane, whom I've never met, and Ry Blyfield, who I've met now and then. Looking at me as an influence, which leaves me in a state of what the fuck.
I didn't mean you to do this.
Because again, it's what you're talking about is the equivalent of what Sid Caesar and Carl Reiner used to do with German and French. It's great accent, but no fucking vocabulary.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea what these people think they're doing, and I recognize I introduced a level of utter and complete visual incoherence, but unintentionally. Those are the unintentional consequences.
Where again, you were working with an idea of abstraction and graphic design. That's,
right. Yeah. As opposed to jerking off.
But thematically, it's the same thing you mentioned about The Watchmen. People take the wrong lesson out of reading Alan Moore in terms of, hey, we can make it darker and have characters rape each other. And that's really not what
I got a feeling that wasn't Alan's intention. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, somehow I'm thinking that.
I'm going out on a limb.
But the cartoonists in your age cohort on either side, either under 66 or older, it's a disaster. I mean, there's that story about Dave Cockrum dying in a VA hospital while the X-Men movies are coming out and making $1 billion, and we're seeing it. I think now I have no idea what younger cartoonists make, even in mainstream, whether there's any sense of this isn't going to last beyond, a decade or so. And I don't know if you interact with that.
I have no idea what other people earn. Mm-hmm. I know. I mean, for example, I'm grateful for the 15 years I spent in television because I recognized that in that realizing that I had no prospects, I also understood that I'm a cult figure. I'm the Randy Newman of comics in a lot of ways.
That's good, actually. I like that.
In that, if you're a civilian, you know Randy Newman, you know him for 3 songs. For I Love L.A., Short People, and if you have kids, it's, You Got a Friend in Me. You got a friend in me, that. And now in the same way with Star Wars, there's this huge back catalog of actual work that reflects my sensibility. People don't know about Davy the Fat Boy or Sail Away, or I Hate All Mankind. And I hate all mankind too, so I'm feeling good about that.
Should be hanging out with Randy Newman.
No. My assistant's convinced he's deaf. I have no idea where that came from. We have to discuss this. I don't know where it's coming from. This is a sidebar. But I digress.
But that sense of being
and in that regard, I'm not ever going to make a fortune doing comic books because I don't share the audience's sensibilities. I feel that no matter what I do, my attack on commercial property tends to be infused with a kind of ridicule, unintentionally, because I feel that's I mean, for example, my version of The Shadow antagonized so many people, it really aggravated the fuck out of them. And it just seemed to me a logical extension of a character that A, that had been a commercial failure since 1949, and B, featured a character who had been born before the turn of the 20th century, who should have had all of the prejudices and belief systems that any white man of that era would have. sorry, oops,
Yeah.
didn't mean it, and I'm in awe of anyone who could actually find anything new to say about Superman. For me, the last word on Superman was Tom DeHaven's book.
I never read that.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's just, it made me cry. But then I'm a big weeper, I should explain. I cry a lot. For someone who's as mean-spirited as I am, I'm also deeply sentimental.
It's probably a protection mechanism, one way or the other.
Anecdotally,
Yeah.
when I saw Jersey Boys for the second time, I had the same reaction to the end of the. Have you seen the show?
No, I haven't.
All right. At the end of the first act of Jersey Boys, Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio make a handshake deal, which I'd read about in '85, which had the same reaction back then. They agree that they're going to give each other 50% of their income for the rest of their lives, no matter what happens. And I had the same reaction to it when I read the piece, and when I saw it. And the first time I saw Jersey Boys, and I took my daughter on to see Jersey Boys because her husband, my stepson, would not take her. And we're sitting in the theater in New York, and the act ends, and she thinks I'm having a stroke.
Yeah.
I'm unable to talk, and I start crying. And she's terrified. She's like, hey, what am I going to do with this old Jew in the middle of New York who's having a stroke? And it was my reaction to that, to the at base of that statement of loyalty. Just continues to make the skin of my arms prickle, and it makes me cry. So, big weeper.
Do you know if that sense of, we'll say, camaraderie? I mean, the way you talk about, the guys you came up with, and that continuity within comics. Do you see that?
No, I don't know. I
know you're on the outside.
I don't know where it comes from. I really, I don't. I mean, I was raised without a father. My mother did a really miserable job raising us. My brothers are, damaged goods. Sorry, guys.
Are you the one that got out? Like when we watched the Crumb movie and you realize Crumb's actually the successful one?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no question. I mean, we also have 3 different fathers, which I didn't find out until I was in my mid-40s. The guy I thought was my father was actually adopted me when I was 4.
It wasn't Bobby Darin, was it? I'm just kidding. Go on.
No, my real father's name is Norman Drucker. I'll stick with Chaykin. When I found this out, I judged my friends whether the first Drucker they came up with was Sam or Mort.
I was going with Mort.
Good choice.
Good,
choice.
okay.
Nicely done. You need to stop this?
No, I just wanted to make sure it was actually recording.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So,
I screwed up once.
So a bastard literally and figuratively, if you will. We are digressing.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
That's what I do.
Okay.
I like when people expand on who they are. And
as long as you're good with them,
what did that revelation affect you in
Which
terms of the bastard revelation?
It gave me character that I didn't know I deserved. Yeah. I mean, I felt it was a great addition to the story.
Did you find your?
It was an aha moment about thank fucking God. All I have in common.
That all makes sense.
Yeah.
But did you find clues to that in your own work previously? Okay, I'm just wondering if there was any sort of coding.
No,
I sort of knew this all along.
It's the same with that. When I did the review of the first volume of Dean and Bruce's book with Alex Toth, I felt they spent too much time trying to find the key to his character in his childhood, as they often do. And I thought that was just nonsense. I think Alex was just a mama's boy Jew baiter, and who was filled with self-loathing, and his narcissism just inculcated his work. But he was the greatest comic book artist who ever lived. A miserable fuck.
Great art can come from shitty people.
Astonishing talent.
I don't mean anything about you.
I don't care. What you think of me is none of my business.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't dig your work.
And that's not necessarily true. You might find me an interesting character who you find repellent at the same time.
That's a possibility too. There's also the story I haven't told you about reading The Black Kiss back when I was in high school. So you're more pornographic noir,
filthy.
Which I grooved on, but I'd moved to a new high school my senior year.
How old were you when you read it?
Must have been 17, 18, so 89.
You were of age.
Oh yeah, I was old enough to read it. Pervy and twisted because you've got the twin beautiful women, one of whom is actually a man, and.
Not by current standards, apparently.
Yeah, I don't even go into the whole gender fluidity thing. We're just going to avoid that because we're too old to understand.
Oh, I understand it completely. I just think it's nonsense.
Yeah, and why it's. But
I'm with Jermaine Greer in this one.
Another Clive James reference. She and Clive were at Cambridge together, and
I think "at" is just a wonderful word.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff about them in his unreliable memoirs, but. High school pals were over and just flipping through some of the comics sitting in my bedroom, and one of these guys was flipping through the Black Kiss and got to the reveal panel where we discover that the woman, in fact, has a dick. And, it was like you could actually see a mushroom cloud coming out of his head, just blew it clean up. I didn't remember having that reaction myself, but John Giegengack, if you're actually listening to this, this is the guy who destroyed your mind back when we were
Hola!
But yeah, that sense of, I don't want to say the inappropriate, but the taboo, I guess.
Well, transgression. I mean, I was a profound coward as a child, and I remained fairly cowardly as an adult. And much of that cowardice is dealt with by throwing challenges at myself and seeing if I can get past them. And I'm in awe of guys like Chester Brown, who feels capable of exposing himself publicly in ways that I cannot. I still operate in metaphor. It's just I'm stuck with it. I can't get around it.
We've done 2 conversations now, Chester and I, and those are very, very interesting.
I like interesting. I think that's a really interesting.
I know it's a vague term to use, but they're multi-layered and weird.
I've
and
never
a
met
third person
the guy.
had to be there.
Never met the guy, and I'm perfectly happy in that particular circumstance.
The work stands for itself. You refer to Gil Kane once as having transcended his influences.
Yes.
And not actually...
Never acknowledged it. Never being aware.
Did you achieve that, do you find?
I don't know. I think I'm, in some ways, not necessarily... Well, I think, for example, what the great irony of the guys who I regard as my mentors is that the great connecting tissue, none of them could write worth a shit. They really couldn't write. Mm-hmm. They all tried, but they were mired in pulp. And...
how rare is that?
I think it's fairly common. I think for the most part.
And how rare is it to find a decent comics artist who can actually write?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm a cartoonist. A cartoonist, by my terms and definitions, is a guy who writes and draws. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm as good a writer as I am an artist. Okay, I think the two skill sets are fairly equal in that sense. But I also think that people always assume that I'm a pulpster and I'm a pulp fan, and I find most pulps just unreadable junk. I like the franchises that exist in them, but the actual work doesn't interest me in the least. That said, I owe my career to reading Edgar Rice Burroughs the day before I was bar mitzvahed, because it demonstrated just what could be done, and I still acknowledge Fritz Leiber as one of the major influences on me as a writer. Leiber and Frank Lesser, that vernacular writing. I don't know. I mean, I think visually, Gil always felt less than when compared to Lou Fine and Mac Rayboy and Hogarth. I never understood his interest in Hogarth. I always thought Hogarth was a fraud in so many ways.
Why is that?
What's that?
Why is that?
Because I think he was a terrible artist. I think he was just, his people just didn't look. It was a mess. I mean, I was never interested in it. Just didn't interest me at all. Whereas Rayboy, I mean, recently, I'm a member of a Facebook page about comics and illustration, and somebody posted a cover of Captain Marvel Jr. I guess it was Boy Comics or one of those, Master Comics. And I'd forgotten just how much of an. I mean, when I think of Rayboy, the first thing that comes to mind is him taking over Edgar Flash Gordon. But that Captain Marvel Jr. stuff, I've forgotten how much it informed Woody's lighting and Gil's sense of motion in space. I always think of Lou Fine. But Rayboy even more so. Rayboy, the kind of the truly homoerotic nature of Captain Marvel Jr., that double lighting, that phenomenal lighting there. And the Elvis Presleyness of it all. Elvis based his look on Captain Marvel Jr. Mm-hmm. You know this.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, Elvis is blonde. Okay? Mm-hmm. He dyed his hair black and cut it like Captain Marvel Jr. because he was a huge Captain Marvel Jr. fan. That's not a joke.
But Gil based Green Lantern on living next door to Paul Newman, right?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you knew this.
That's the one story that I'd read that I was hoping to God was true, because that explains so much about why Hal Jordan.
Hal Jordan is Paul Newman.
Nice.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
But Gil, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the material you're working on at the time you're doing it. And Gil was a guy who clearly grew up reading comic books. He grew up reading pulps. He had a 10th grade education. I don't think he ever finished high school. No college, obviously, but incredibly well read and profound autodidact. And I think he read himself out of fiction. And by reading yourself out of fiction, you can't really compete contextually.
And that's in terms of, as you said, moving towards criticism rather than...
Well, I also think one of the reasons he couldn't write was because he'd stopped reading what he was competing with.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant perhaps he'd gotten too involved in like the critical aspects of the theory of it all.
I also think Gil was innately lazy. Mm-hmm. He worked as hard as he had to get where he wanted to be. And Woody was just a guy who wrote, comic book clunkiness. And Gray, they were all pulpsters. And Neil, I don't know what the hell he's doing. But the Flat Earth. Huh?
The Flat Earth. Whatever.
Please. No, the expanding, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. But a lot of it is that I think Gil read himself out of it. Woody never really transcended, neither did Gray. And I found that, I want to do more challenging material, and I'm trying to find words to convey what I'm saying. I'm having a hard time without sounding like a complete asshole.
No, but it's the question I have is like, what drew you toward a lot of the work in the last 20 years that you've done has been more American history oriented, and the fact that you're reading in that space informs it.
I'm not particularly interested in superhero stories. They don't. I mean, I'll go to the movies because it's a once a year experience. But I can't watch that stuff on TV, any of the Netflix stuff or the DC stuff. I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but it's not my world. I find it very cornball and insipid.
Did you watch Legion on FX?
I'm 4 episodes in, and I'm wondering. I'm trying to.
It's kind of worth it. It's not. It's not superhero.
I know,
it gets away from.
I love it. I'm a big fan of Dan Stevens. I think Stevens' transformation to this character is pretty impressive, and I love Aubrey Plaza, and I want to like it. But
I understand exactly. It's not totally rewarding.
Every time I talk to my attorney, I say, "Watch the show. Tell me whether I want to bother." Because I'm 4 episodes in, and I'm still not sure I give a shit. Yeah. And I like Hawley. I've read his novels. I love Fargo. I like what he's doing there. But I just don't think I give a shit about people with enhanced abilities.
No,
that franchise.
Yeah, and to me, that's the least interesting aspect of it is the superhero-ness.
My favorite comic book show on television is Banshee, which is not a comic book, but it feels like I said it felt like a Jason Aaron's comic book he hadn't written. Medine Haspil, when he watched the show after I'd been hitting him on it, said, it's Jason Aaron's working with John Carpenter. It really is.
Nice.
And Banshee has 4 seasons, 3 of which are brilliant, and 4th is okay. That is just amazing. It's some of the best action stuff on television. It's completely nuts. It's crazy shit. It's very pulpy, but very entertaining. But I tried to watch The Flash. I tried to watch Daredevil. I just don't give a shit.
And you worked on the original Flash TV show way back. The only good thing that came out of that was the Mike Myers Middle-Aged Man parody on SNL. They did a parody of The Flash with Middle-Aged Man. It had the same effect where he's running and they kind of blur everything behind. Oh, look it up on YouTube when I'm gone. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's about 2 minutes long. Well, knowing SNL, it was probably about 5 minutes long, but should have been 2 minutes long.
I mean, Mike Myers is someone I have zero interest in. And I like the Austin Powers stuff.
You weren't a big Love Guru fan? I'm just kidding. Nobody was a Love Guru.
I have no idea what that means.
It was the movie that sank his career.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He's doing the Gong Show.
I heard about that.
With a full face of makeup, unrecognizable.
Yeah. He also did a documentary of Shep Gordon that was kind of more a hagiography.
I have no idea who that is.
Some super agent out here. I don't know L.A. and the whole culture at all. I just drop in for 36 hours at a time.
I no longer live in it. It's really a treat.
Yeah. What is California to you? We're touching on that before rounding out to 10,000 other subjects. But it's been 30 years plus that you've been here. What is California? How does it inform what you do beyond just being where you live?
Okay.
Has it infected you?
Yes. I moved to California, like I said, the day before I turned 35, having no intention of staying because I really couldn't visualize. In retrospect, I regret not moving out 10 years sooner. But at that point, I couldn't figure out how to translate my skill sets into an income. And unlike a lot of people who moved to California at the same time I did not create a diorama of a New York lifestyle in California. Gil did. A number of other friends of mine did. And they never were very happy. I went native. The only time I've ever lived in an apartment in California was when I was between marriages. I lived in the IKEA apartment, the temporary, the standing set. I've always lived in a house, and I learned to drive in California because I never drove in New York City. I learned to drive at the age of 37. It took me 2 years to get my shit together to do it. And I do it now as a matter of course. I still luxuriate when I'm in a place with public transportation. One of the great joys of European travel is taking trains. I love it.
My whole thing with New York now, whenever I go in to record, I park on West 96th.
And train.
Yeah.
And subway.
It's one block away from the subway.
I have Metro cards inside my toiletry bag in my permanently packed kit. It's always there.
Yeah.
When I first moved to California, I was back there. I was in New York every 6 weeks. I was romantically involved. My marriage fell apart shortly after I moved to California. I was romantically involved with a woman who was living on 84th and 3rd, 94th and 3rd, and I was living here. So we would end up in each other's bed every 8 days. One of us would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the other one would be there. It was very sexy and romantic. So
it sounds like college to me.
Well, it was a relationship that brought me to my knees. A relationship based solely on sexual attraction, which meant it ultimately evolved to nothing. And so when I lost my last television job, I was fired in June of 2002 from an unwatchable television series. I came home the next day and asked my wife whether she'd be okay if I never went back. And she was cool with it. And I never have. I mean, at that point, I flew to New York a month later after the 4th of July holiday and went back to working comics full time, having no idea whether I could draw anymore, because I hadn't drawn in many, many years. And I discovered that my chops were in pretty good shape, and that I developed a more evolved sense of improvisation. I was less. My fear of being unable to do something had lessened dramatically. And
what do you think accounts for that?
No idea. No clue at all.
And were there aspects of TV storytelling or working out stories for TV that it all influenced?
Possibly.
Or leaked into what you would do?
A lot of it also is the understanding of service of narrative.
Yeah.
Because I worked on really shitty television, and for the most part it was cheap and low budgeted. And one had to learn how to maximize standing sets and maximize use of cast. And keep budget. I mean, it was a constant war and battle against budgets. And so when I watch television today, when I watch The Crown, for example, like $13 million an episode, my fucking God.
Now that I'm burning my way through Mad Men, when you see like 4 or 5 episodes go by without a lead character appearing, I'm like, I'm sure they're getting paid.
Yeah.
See,
Mad Men.
I mean, just
Mad Men is. The thing about Mad Men, I like to compare the Mad Men to the Nick,
which I haven't watched. And I've heard great stuff about. But
the difference is that on Mad Men, how many seasons have you seen?
I'm just started season 6, the second to last season.
The problem for me with Mad Men is how hermetic it is, and it feels like a play about the 1960s. At no point, whenever they go outside, I am never convinced they are in New York.
I believe that. I was struck as one of the episodes I watched on the flight out here. The
St. Mark's?
The black secretary for Dawn meets up with her friend in a diner, and it was like, oh, you actually showed characters who aren't part of that world, just sitting down and having a coffee.
But I never believe that it's New York City in the 1960s and 70s. I also will say...
Yeah, the St. Mark's thing looked like it was a bombed
totally
out.
Fake. Totally fake.
It could have been London after the Blitz or something.
And also, in the real... And I was working in advertising in the 70s, because that was the way you made money. Because comic books paid so shittily. And Pete's hair should have looked like Sonny Bono's, and Don's hair should have looked like Pete's.
Mm-hmm. I get you.
Okay.
I was so disappointed that R.O. Blackman has never watched the show, because he lived that 50s and 60s era of his, no, never watch it. It must just be fiction. I'm like,
oh no, it's, I mean, first of all, the whole Mad Men that never existed. That phrase that did not exist. That was a concoction of Matthew Weiner. Whereas the Nick which takes place in 1900 and 1901 in New York City, lived outside. And it was a perfectly convincing, believable New York of 1901. Managed to shoot in Harlem, Brooklyn, and New Orleans. And it's phenomenally convincing. It's one of the bloodiest television shows I've ever seen. It was phenomenal. I loved it.
Well, there's also that aspect of creating a universe. And as we were talking before, Mike, but I think we can share this, our great bonding moment before we started recording was the fact that you and I both feel that season 4 was the greatest season of The Wire, Absolutely. The one in the school system.
Absolutely.
To me, the idea that you feel confident enough in the world that you've created that you can jettison most of the leads and the whole narrative propulsion and just go focus on a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds and show how the system is working on them. One of my all-time favorite novels, which I've gone on so many times about on this show, is The Leopard by Giuseppe Lampedusa, made into a movie.
I know of it. I've never read it.
Yeah, wonderful novel. But there is a chapter where the priest for the prince, who is a lead character, the priest gets his own chapter. He goes home for 30 pages and has to deal with some family issues in his little Sicilian town. And it was a moment of Lampedusa feeling comfortable enough with the world he created that let me show you another aspect of it that you weren't even thinking of before.
When was the novel written?
It was written 58, 59, came out like 60, 61, referring back to Italy 100 years earlier during the Risorgimento. The story was that he got rejected at every publishing house, dies of lung cancer. It gets accepted, but he dies of lung cancer before it comes out. The communists hate it, the fascists hate it. And it's bigger than Gone with the Wind and Thriller put together. Basically, everybody else in the country goes gaga for it. And then they make a movie with Burt Lancaster.
Does the movie suck?
The Criterion edition is better than the original theatrical version because there's extra scenes and they just... subtitling is better than having Burt Lancaster mouthing Italian being dubbed into English.
I like subs.
It still misses the final chapter of the novel is years after where the movie ends, and you need that for the sake of understanding time and these characters and their history. It's a wonderful novel. It's worth watching because it's also Claudia Cardinale and Alain Delon, and they're just beautiful to look at.
I mean, I'm a member of I belong to Filmstruck, and I joined it because I know that it would guilt me into watching stuff that I hadn't gotten around to seeing, and I find that I'm finding it harder and harder to watch movies on television.
Why is that?
I guess I watch television on television. I like movies in the movies, and in New York, I was a regular at the Elgin for most of the 70s and 80s. Back when the Elgin was a revival theater and film forum.
Yeah, I went to go see the restored Third Man at the Film Forum last year. I mean, oh my God!
Look, I mean, one of the highest dramatic moments of my life was years ago. There was a road show of Nothing Sacred and My Man Godfrey. In this early, really shitty pre-3-strip Technicolor print of Nothing Sacred, and I knew of Carole Lombard, but in a very generalized way, and these two films in a double feature were mind-blowing. I mean, it just completely fucked me up. And I'm looking at, because Nothing Sacred is a flawed film, mostly because of Frederick March. Because he's so fucking awful. He's such a lox that you watch this movie and say, why isn't Ray Milland in this movie? Why isn't Fred McMurray doing this? Why isn't Robert Montgomery doing this? Why isn't Robert Young or William Powell doing this? Because March is just so humorless. And the film is just so... Lombard is so fucking amazing in this picture. And then you see him in My Man Godfrey. I mean, they showed it because they showed Nothing Sacred first and then My Man Godfrey. And it's 37 and 35. And, Eugene Pallette. Oh, my God. And just Alan Mowbray. And both films just staggered the shit out of me. I mean, it created in me a real obsession with 1930s and 40s screwball comedy. I'm a huge Preston Sturges guy.
Yeah, and how far back does that date? Because again, your early 30s work, you're already doing.
Well, I was aware of all this stuff. I've told it anecdotally that I had German measles. I mean, the week of October the 21st of 1963 was Iowa tests in Brooklyn, and I couldn't stay home from school. My bar mitzvah was the following Saturday, and I was running a high fever. My mother was convinced it was simply a nervous reaction to the bar mitzvah and hives. And it was German measles, and that Friday, I had bar mitzvah money. I went to the newsstand. There were no new comics. But the Ballantine editions of the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels had come out, and I spent 50 cents on a copy of The Fighting Men of Mars with a cover by Bob Abbott. And I sat and read it on my stoop, and it was like Saul on the road to Damascus. I mean, it was a genuinely transformative experience, because this was, holy shit, where's this been all my life? I'm 13. And just like, it was a shock to my system. The next day, I go through my bar mitzvah, me and Richie Toback, and Lo Mosomar Yaakov Uvrachim Yisroel. That's all I got. And
it's like a half Torah, but go on. Sorry.
That's all I got. It's the first line. It's the best I get. But I sang it, and I was good,
I couldn't do it.
102 fever. And that night, we were on welfare. My mother my grandmother did 90% of the cooking. The rest of it was kosher deli. There were no girls there because I knew no girls. I was completely devoid of any social skills that would be in any, pregnant girlfriend 5 years later, but at that point I was not really ready to go. And I had to be carried home because I was so sick. And I spent the next week in bed, and I watched the NEW movies all day, because in those days the afternoons were filled with movies, and the NEW.
It's Channel 5, right?
Yeah, Channel 5 in New York, owned the Warner Brothers catalog. It's where I first saw The Adventures of Robin Hood, all the gangster pictures. And they were showing the second cycle of gangster films that week. It was the gangster comedies, like City for Conquest, Little Caesar, not Little Caesar, Little Brother Orchid, Slight Case of Murder, All Through the Night, and it's all the same cast, and I'm focusing on Alan Jenkins and Frank McHugh. And I'm realizing that everybody in the movies who's supposed to be stupid sounds like me. And I made a conscious decision that I would not sound like that anymore. And because at that point, I sounded like a cross between Leo Gorcey and Hunts Hall. Or as we like to call him in my house, Douglas Fairbanks Rosenblum. So I actively chose to develop this mid-Atlantic accent. To my detriment, I think. It was a mistake. Because years later, when I read Joe Papp's quote, it's a paraphrase. He said that one must never forget that the atomic bomb which destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were built by graduates of MIT who'd gotten there from the Bronx High School of Science. So that the Second World War was won by guys who sounded like Leo Gorcey and Hunts Hall. Which I thought was pretty fabulous. I really did. So, more digression.
Yeah, no, I work on a completely generic accent.
That's me.
My father's Romanian, Israeli, my mom's British.
So,
you don't sound like you're from New Jersey. That's pretty much.
Look, I mean, my brothers. Well, to a certain extent, when I'm my
it comes
wife,
out, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. I will still just to get a laugh out of her, pronounce the word HOTDOG as hotdog, and coffee as coffee. My sponsor is from Jersey, and when I was listening to Langella read his book Drop Names, and Langella has that great Gilkane nasality. Every so often, Langella would drop it and go back to the Jerseyness of it. And just do coffee, which I wish Langella was 40 years younger so he could play Gaetalese in the movie. I really, that would be great. There's a digression for you.
Oh, which is what we're all about. But LA versus New York?
There we go. I never really embraced the LA social model. A lot of it is that I don't care about other people particularly. And the dirty secret of Southern California is that what Herman Mankiewicz sent in the telegram to Ben Hecht in 1927 still has a basic truth to it, which is that it's a quote: "There is a fortune to be made out here, and the competition is idiots. Don't let this get around." California is an immigrant state in every way, both from foreign countries and from out of state. People who are successful in Southern California, for the most part, are people who have experienced actual travail, which in my word is code for weather.
Yeah.
It's people who are raised here tend to take an aspect so completely for granted of the lifestyle that they have no real ambition. My first experience with this was in 1980. Len, what was his name? I forget his last name. The guy did a heavy metal movie. Was working with Michael Gross, who was a former art director of the National Lampoon, who had partnered up with Ivan Reitman and was doing all these movies. They were trying to get the heavy metal movie up and running. They could not. They'd spent 6 weeks trying to get designs out of their writing staff, their art staff on the big sequence of the heavy metal movie with the girl and the bird and shit.
Right.
You know? They couldn't get anything out of these people. They were just pissing away money. So they paid me what, in retrospect, was chump change. They got me really cheap. They flew me out for a week. I had a per diem. They put me in a hotel. Whether it was the Sheraton Universal, the Universal Sheraton Hilton, whatever, it was up at the top of the studio. I was able to do what they needed from me between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. daily, which left my afternoons free. I did freelance work for A&M Records for the entire week. I designed 2 ads for the police. I did an album cover. And that was my epiphany. I realized that Californians were the laziest sons of bitches I'd ever seen in my life. They had absolutely no work ethic. Mm-hmm. And that remained true. That people who come to California from New York, Chicago, Boston, who bring an understanding of life's requirements can succeed here.
Because if I fail, I have to go back to somewhere where it's cold?
Yeah. Okay. So it's one way of looking at it. But I also, I think you need to have your ass kicked a little bit because California is the easiest place in the world to live. The earthquakes are the only real problem. My first quake was in January, like a couple months after I moved out here. I was living in a house that was a U shape, glass on 3 sides of the interior U. And I'm standing in my kitchen, buck naked, surrounded by glassware. And it was a lesson. I mean, the 94 quake, I was living in a new house in the valley. And by that point, I was riding him out. And my wife literally grabbed me by my chest there and said, "Get up, it's the big one," and dragged me out. We were yellow tagged. But that's it. It really is. It's incredibly undemanding. You can actually get shit done. You know, I read a lot about the German emigres who came here. Thomas Mann and the World War II set. Brecht and those guys. And their relationships to California are so condescending and so insulting. That Woody Allen picture, Cafe Society.
Never watched that. I haven't seen much of his work from the past 20 plus years.
It's nothing special. Yeah. You want to see good Woody Allen, watch Aziz Ansari's show on Netflix. Master of None. Yeah. It really is. It's really swell. Yeah. Particularly the most, it really is. It's great. But,
the Cafe Society.
Yeah, I'm just not, I spent most of the 70s being very smug about California and its relationship to New York City. I left New York City when I realized that there was no way I couldn't afford to live there anymore. My great regret, of course, that I gave up my apartment. I sold my apartment. But even now, I love visiting the city. I was supposed to be there last week. But I like being a tourist in New York City. I really do. Times Squared, the books you had me sign, is very much a phantasmagoria of an 8-year-old boy's idea of the underbelly of New York City as visualized in the 1950s. That's really what the city looked like to me. And that really is the diorama that kept me in New York for so long. When I finally left, I realized that I had left behind a fabulizing of New York as opposed to a real New York.
But that's a city that's made for invention.
Maybe, but the fact is that the New York that I left behind in my head, had ceased to exist 10 years earlier. I loved New York in the 70s. New York, it was in my 20s. The city was a shithole.
Your friend Leibowitz always says that it doesn't matter whenever you were 20-something. That's the best time to be in New York.
Best fucking time. It was great. I lack the smugness of ex-New Yorkers. One of my favorite people in this town, I live in a small town, is an evangelical Christian right-wing conservative therapist. And will frequently look at me over lunch and say, "What the fuck are you doing here?"
For a Jew, you've got some good idea.
But you're stuck here. And again, I like I say, I live in a very white redneck town. And I thrive. I'm good.
That's all you can ask for.
You know, life's great, life's grand, future in hand, no more. Jonah, goodbye. How am I riding? I'm riding high. Cole Porter. Mid-period look, Cole Porter.
Tell me about the importance of musicality, not music itself, but musicality to your comics.
Oh, it's enormous. It's huge. My stuff is really loud.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my work is very, very loud, very verbal, both chatty and filled with noise. And it's a big, big part of the work. I mean, I can't emphasize enough the influence of Frank Lesser and Stephen Sondheim on my work. I mean, Lesser, just the wordplay, the vernacular wordplay. When I read Sondheim's first book of lyrics, and he talks about, and he shits all over Lorenz Hart, but deifies Frank Lesser. My wife couldn't care less about this stuff. She just doesn't care. And I'm in bed reading this book, and look! You know, my taste I am codified. You know, whatever. You know, please calm down. You know, stop yelling, you'll wake the dog. But I, you know, it's really important stuff.
In terms of how it ties into the Americanness of
to a great
work?
extent. I mean, and also, I mean, my wife is convinced that I play my music collection to annoy my assistants, because I have, you know, my taste is Catholic, but more Opus Dei than getting out of them. I mean, I listen to American jazz from the beginning of its inception to 1960 or so, with a couple of outliers. A lot of doo-wop, old-timey music, everything from Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys and Charlie Monroe, Uncle Dave Macon, Texas swing, and the American popular song, usually girl vocalists, Lee Wiley, June Christie, Chris Connor, Nita O'Day, a lot of that stuff. I mean, this morning I'm listening to the Dial Moderns, and it informs the work. It really does. I mean, to a great extent, Times Squared is what initiates me into this, because Times Squared starts as a book about what New York looked like to me when I was a kid, and when I realized the musical component of it, I have to start doing some study, and that study leads me to scholarship about the work, and further, the photographic scholarship of the work is huge. From everything from Herman Leonard to Bill Claxton, that work, because so much of the work was photographed. There's that phenomenal picture of Dexter Gordon by Herman Leonard that looks like a Greek statue, shot from his ankles up, and it's this massive figure in a pork pie hat. When I was a little boy, my parents had friends whose son was in his 20s, who dressed in so archetypal a young white progressive bebopper's outfit. He had crepe sole shoes, baggy pants, slightly longish jacket, you know, black open wide spread collar shirt, you know, a Mr. B collar. And you know, we listened to Symphony Sid, you know, on WEVD, the station that speaks your language. WJZ, first of all, WJZ, like, make everything go real crazy over Jay-Z. Make everything go real crazy over Jay-Z. You don't want to think you're listening to lazy. It's what Tim Hauser, Manhattan Transfer, used to always pronounce Count Basie, because that was the way King Pleasure pronounced it in Jumpin' with Symphony Sid. And he went on a WEVD, which was Eugene V. Debs. Yeah, the Jewish station. Yeah. Well, it was the station that speaks your language, and,
which is code for "you rotten kike." That's
but Sid also did a Latin radio show on WEBD, where he spoke no Spanish, but he spoke phonetically. He would you know here's your boy Symphony Sid, only in Spanish. You know, there's a reason why the pitch for Times Squared described it as being like walking down a street, and that each step was like the turn of a dial of a car radio. because that's really what New York sounded like to me as a kid. That you would walk down the street in the summer and the windows would all be open, and you'd hear an entire plethora of information and data coming out of the radio. And radio was music, not drama, because I'm too young for that. Television was drama. But, I remember listening to Symphony Sid as a kid. Sid, Bird. I'm 5 years old with this shit. So, and my mother was a band singer. She was, she sang with bands in the late 30s and the early 40s. I'm pretty sure that's how she met the guy who knocked her up with me. And so when I saw Ironweed, the film version of William Kennedy's book with Hector Babenco, with Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep, and Streep is this kind of hapless old drunk who's singing maudlin songs in bars. All that maudlin stuff was stuff that I heard at home. Heart of my heart, I love that melody. Too bad we had to part. I know a tear would glisten if once more I could listen to the gang that sang Heart of my heart. She very, very sentimental, very schmaltzy stuff, maudlin. And it was music I heard constantly at home. I never listened to rock and roll until I was in, I guess, my early tweens, adolescence. And that was all getting smacked in the face with doo-wop. Hearing Leroy Griffin and the Nutmegs doing Story Untold. The Del Vikings with doing Sunday Kind of Love. The first time I heard the way Blue Moon should sound, I was like, what the fuck? Where's that dip, warp, boom, boom, blah, 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 boom, I love that shit so much. And for the longest time, the music I listened to was almost always informed by a cappella. I came to country western through cowboy poetry. Come all ye Texas Rangers, wherever you may be, I'll tell you of some trouble that happened unto me. My name is nothing extra, oh, that I will not tell. And here's to all you Rangers, I'm sure I wish you well. That, and even
it sounds inflected like our Haftarah.
Well, there is, look.
Yeah, the Jewish cowboy, Bucky Goldstein. That's
come on, there's a reason why the angels sing is so much, like the klezmerim. I was explaining to somebody at a show about what Romania meant. That Romanian is code for non-kosher Jewish food. Romania. But yeah, it's all. Look, Ziggy Elman's The Angels Sing. It's all there, and jazz. With Lambert Hendrickson Ross, which is something that all of my assistants hate. It is just a universal thing. Everybody in his office hates vocalese. I have a former colleague, an assistant of mine, a colleague of mine who now will call me up and do his versions of Andy Ross doing Twisted, which is hysterically funny, in a Scottish accent.
But that's the texture underneath everything?
Always. Well, it's, for me...
It seems to be your pathway into the Americana that characterizes your work.
Yeah, well, the title of the first episode of Sunshine Patriot is Tarara Bundie. Mm-hmm. It really is. And the title of the second issue of Divided States, the essay in there is called Across the Great Divide, which is, of course, the three great musical influences of my life in the 70s, Van Morrison, Ry Cooder, and the band. The band, if you talk about American music, the band reflected. The first time I heard the second band album, I was on acid. I was in a canyon up above Boulder called Dream Canyon, listening to an LP on one of those little portable record players. That was about the size of a portable typewriter. And the first time I heard Jemima Surrender, or The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, I was so fucked up. And the music just, it felt, to an odd degree, it reminded me so much of what George Metzger was doing in Moondog, that underground comic book that came out of his stuff. Yeah.
You happy?
In what regard?
Happy about your work? Not happy about this last 2 hours, which I'm sure are just wearing you into the fucking ground.
Are you kidding? I'm delighted. Fuck, man. The opportunity to be as this narcissistic and not have to do with sobriety is fabulous. Generally speaking, yes. Yeah, I am.
I mean, I know there's the uncertainty about comics, etc., but that's been there since you started.
I'm really blessed in the sense that I've had an incredibly charmed life. I'm very lucky. I take this never for granted. I have plenty of bitterness to go with joy because I'm, at this point in my life, I'm an atheist. I believe that once I'm gone, the dirt nap is all there is. I'm not, I've got nothing. There's not going to be I'm not going to be drawn by Al Hirschfeld sitting on a cloud looking down, wondering what, how things are going to work out. And I'm really, really lucky. Do I wish there were things different? Absolutely. I feel like Ricky Roma in
Glengarry, yeah.
But which I should have played at one point. But I mean, I wish I were younger. I wish I were not quite so fat. But I'm still an incredibly alpha character, and I am pretty happy. I watched this thing about 90-year-olds, and still functioning. And Jerry Seinfeld was the kid on the show. He's 62. And he was talking about what his morning is like. And it described exactly how I am. I mean, I wake up in a state of utter and complete blind rage and inchoate depression. And I lever myself out of bed, this elbow, this hand. I sleep on the right side of the bed, left side of the bed. And once I'm standing, I'm good. As the discs stack, like the chips in a poker game.
Yeah.
And I'm vertical, and my dog is at my feet, and I'm ready to go. I'm not ecstatic. That's the province of fools, but I am pleased. I feel as if I have managed to achieve a career of some scale and value by doing exactly what I wanted to do, which is pretty fucking arrogant. And anybody who would not be grateful for that experience isn't paying attention, in my mind. I mean, I work in a business in which most success is defined by being identified with a particular branded character. And I'm not that guy. My own impatience and insecurity has forced me to constantly reinvent myself over a 45-year period, 46 years now. And as my wife frequently reminds me, I'm entitled to be pissed off, but shut up and get back to work. And it's a good thing. When I was newly sober, Alcoholics Anonymous has a phrase which is grating and cloying, an attitude of gratitude. And I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I deeply resent using it as an aspect of the brand. But my sobriety informs who I am in that regard. And when I was newly sober, I had no gratitude whatsoever at all. I felt victimized, I felt tormented, and I felt cheated. And 25 years of sobriety in, 66 years old, I am very grateful for the life I've had. I'm well married after many tries, and I live in, I live at the beach, for fuck's sake. All I got to do is die before the tsunami, and I'm good. That's my deal. But yeah, happy is, it's just so.
I know.
So relative.
It's a loaded term.
It is. I mean, I'm not ecstatic. I don't walk around in a state of sublime joy and bliss. There's nothing Buddhist about me. But I'm surrounded by people who I respect who respect me. It's good.
Howard Chaykin, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
Thanks for coming up to see me. You've got to find much better things to do with your life.
And that was Howard Chaykin. Howard does not have a website, but you can find his work in just about any comic shop anywhere. His newest series, published by Image Comics, is Divided States of Hysteria. For me, his seminal work was American Flagg, which is 2 G's and 1 or 2 exclamation points. as well as Times Squared and Black Kiss. But he's got decades of great comics out there, and he's still going along in his mid-60s. He is on Facebook if you want to follow him there. I'm under the impression he doesn't spend a lot of time online, but it's Howard, like you'd spell Howard. Chaykin is Chaykin. And once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Howard, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast, patron-only blog, the handwritten show notes for every episode, the series of ebooks I'm still desperate to launch, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. This episode was part of my L.A. trip prior to a San Diego trade show, just like last week's episode with Graham Chaffee. That side trip was pretty expensive, I'll be honest, between the rental car, hotel, parking. Food and coffee were pretty negligible, but the other ones did run up quite a bill. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like travel, web hosting, and equipment, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod, where you can make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Andrew Tanner, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. You've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. Oh yeah, I also saw on Facebook that David is going to be doing a concert on August 4th. If you guys give me 1 second, I will find the information for that. Bayerwald. On May 4th at a place called McCabe's in Los Angeles. That's MCCABES. So go to McCabe's.com and find out more about that. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with legendary underground cartoonist Joyce Farmer. So if you're one of those people who thinks Howard is incredibly sexist and it was chauvinistic to put him on, we can balance that out by having a great feminist cartoonist for next week. Till next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and at YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.